Shelley said that she's coming. On some.
We're unmuted and recording. Did you want me to pause?
No, well, just as maybe notice to the folks that are here, we're still waiting for a quorum. Shelley just texted me back and said that she is joining us today. Deb is going to be about 15 minutes late. And I don't know if Shelley's coming in person. I just asked her.
She's out of town. She'll be joining us remotely.
Pardon, we're going to just wait just for a second here.
He's online.
She here now?
How are you?
Oh, great.
Good, good. They have some good sandwiches here.
Hi, Shelley. There she is. Hi, Shelley.
How are you?
Sorry about that. I had my schedule off. I'm in Montana again, so my apologies.
No problem. You saved us because now we have a quorum because we don't have Deb here quite yet. So we'll call the meeting to order now. It's about 12:05. And first up is approval of the agenda. Shelley, do you have any changes to the agenda?
I do not recommend approving it.
Okay, it is public comment. Do we have anybody here for public comment? Seeing and hearing none. We have the October minutes in front of us. I've been through these. They looked good to me. There was one minor change that we had made after the last meeting. I think those are incorporated here. So Shelley, do you want to make a motion on the minutes?
I make motion to approve the minutes, please.
Great. Okay, we'll
Second.
adopt those. So I first want to, before we turn this over to Joe Warner, I want to welcome Joe, and we appreciate that you're here. We're glad to have you. Joe and I have worked together over the years, probably more than we'd want to admit, because then we'd have to say how old we are. But
I'm still young.
yeah, I'm not. But we first encountered each other at Search. Just down the hill here, and he worked there for a number of years and came over first as controller and then came back as CFO for a year or so, and then has been working in the order ever since then. So we're happy to have Joe here. He did just start Tuesday, as we all know, and so we're going to take a little pity on him, not much, but a little pity this time. We're not expecting a super deep dive, but Joe, it's all yours.
Well, high level, when I was going through the financial statements on the income side, we seem to have a softening of the revenue that happens typically this time of year. We saw decreased volumes. Expenses seemed to float pretty average, so we didn't see no decreases on that side. But there is some opportunity as we're looking at some of the waste that's posted. Help clean some of the financial statements up, hopefully. We have a lot of back-end processes where we're doing stuff. So that's kind of been my initial focus, is process versus income statement. On the balance sheet side, we did see a decrease in cash that was rather significant. One driver of that was we did process 3 payrolls. So you see that third payroll cash go out every month. And we also are seeing the impacts of Wildflower Corp cash. So we're paying $800,000 in expenses for them with no cash income at this point. Kind of high level basics.
Okay. Shelley, do you have any questions? I do have some questions I just want to pose to Joe.
No, I don't.
So on Wildflower Court, do you, or maybe Nathan, who's on, have a idea when we will be able to actually start dropping bills for Wildflower Court?
Actually, me and Tammy were talking about that yesterday. So she got a hold of the Meridian processor that has it. He stated that the application is on his desk. So whether that means he processes it in a week or a month, it's unknown. I talked to Nate about this too, that I had processed 2 applications in my last employment before I left. One was in January, which they still had processed that. I had done a change of address on one of the clinics and they took 4 months to process that. And so as a Medicare, I mean, it's happened to everyone. And so I wouldn't hold my breath expecting it to be done instantly. So if it takes another month or 2, I wouldn't be surprised. But that is outside our control. And then Medicaid will do nothing until Medicare does, and none of the commercials will do anything until Medicare does. So they have us linked up.
So, but just for the record though, it's a matter of timing, not if we get
It's my understanding, yeah.
paid for those receivables since
They'll retro back to the date we submitted the application.
we merged, right? And when did the new rate go into effect? When that happened off the top?
October 1.
October 1.
Still, I mean, that's still pending the approval of the application, so those funds are all just sitting there too.
Sitting there. I got you. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I'm glad you're looking at the back end processes. I know that was an issue. One of the things I'd like to put on the table is something that was on our agenda about I think the last time we talked about it, I believe it was February. And just for maybe background, right now, CBJ has all of our cash. So we do everything through a central treasury function. And the administrative process of reconciling the cash accounts is extraordinarily cumbersome. And so what I had asked Sam Hughes to look into is what would it take? What do we have to do to potentially bring our operating cash at least in house? There's charter issues that come into play and so forth, and whether it can be done via ordinance and so forth. But I'd just like to put that on that's not a, Joe, that's not it's not a front burner hot issue, but it's something we'd like to make some progress. Sam's very familiar with this issue as well, and now that he's back at the city, maybe he can help us on that. So, the other question that I want to put out there is our budget and our ability to meet our budget for the year was based on what we thought at the time were some pretty solid assumptions of having to do with average daily census for especially mental health, around $5,000, per bed day there. We've been substantially below that so far this fiscal year. And so I'd like to get a pretty solid idea of what that means with respect to our budget. What impact is the fact that we've been so far below ADC on mental health, and if there's other areas as well, just so that we can have, when we're coming into this next meeting, you'll be closing October, and you're reporting on that, so we'll have 4 fiscal months under our belt. So start giving us an idea about where it looks like we're headed with our budget. I think that's important for us all to understand, because this time last year was pretty dark, so if you wouldn't mind putting that on your to-do list for last time too. And I would like to have a look back. We have a $770,000 loss for September, for the month of September. And so when we come back for our next meeting, I'd like to kind of look at both September and October, kind of talk about the reasons for that. So let's not forget about September when we come in for the next month. Okay.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So if we have a $770,000 loss, and kind of reading the report here, we lost approximately that much money over at Wildflower Court, or paid out that much money in Wildflower Court. So does that mean that when we get back reimbursed, that fix it? You know what I'm saying?
Wildflower Court, we posted their revenue and their expenses. So they have both sides of the equation. So their total loss, we paid that out, but that wasn't their total loss. So a lot of that money does lie in the hospitals.
It's just all pretty much covered.
Yes, most of it.
I think just once you get your feet more firmly on the ground, we can, no rush on that. Other than the next meeting. So, any other questions relative to the financial statements by anybody from the board or online? Yeah, Brenda.
Sort of question, comment, but, and I know, I think we've talked about this before, it has to do with mental health days. Because, when we anticipate our census, it isn't based on just, local people getting into the program. I know that from the get-go, there was an assumption that there would be referrals from other parts of the state, which happens with facilities like this. And, the kind of operation we had envisioned would necessitate other referrals. It isn't going to be totally locally supported, which means we really need to know to what extent we have been fairly assertively or aggressively advertising, and is there a need, an unmet need still in the state? It seems like there always is, with API never seems to have enough beds or keep staff to serve the beds it has, and Fairbanks has had problems in the past. Even out west in Bethel, there have been referrals in the past. So I think as we look at, we can't just look at whether our beds have gotten filled. We need to look at, is this a program we can support with anticipated referrals from around the state? And if not, then fairly quickly that deficit needs to be addressed, because something has changed statewide that these referrals aren't going to be coming in. That's a problem.
I agree. Kim, do you want to talk to that?
Sure, yeah, through the chair. So I think it's multifaceted. One, I think we're still getting referrals through the state. What we're facing and what a lot of people are facing in the state is staffing. It's trying to get nurses in. There's a lot of reasons for that. We've talked before. There's not a lot of, the nursing schools really put a pause during COVID, bringing people through. We're just now kind of seeing those open up, and we'll see those nurses graduate next year. So that will help feed the system. And so we just haven't had the pipeline really to feed that. We have currently 3 nurses that one's orienting now, one will start on Monday, and one starting the following week up on MHU. So that will help. So when you're looking at a decreased staffing, you also kind of have to pick and choose your acuity that you get that you can handle with that staffing. We also, part of that has been provider instability. We haven't had strong providers. I'm happy to share Dr. Taram did sign a contract with us, so he'll be up on MHU. That will help provide much needed stability with not having locums. The locums have been great, but they don't know our system. And so, it'll be more fluid with him up there. So I think as we get more staffing in, that will help. The other aspect to that is there's such a long delay at the state right now to get licensure for nurses. It used to be 8 weeks, and now we're looking at anywhere from 14 to 18 weeks to get an Alaska nursing license. AHA's very aware of that. The state's very aware of that. We're working very closely to, how we can get that to work, educating the folks that are applying for the licensure, reviewing their applications to make sure they don't miss a checkbox or anything that would delay the process. So it's all, that's why I said it was multifaceted, but the plan is to keep continuing to increase that census. There are still referrals coming in throughout the state, but we're having to choose kind of which ones make sense with the current acuity on the unit and staffing grid.
Thank you for the chair follow. So what I hear you saying, and I know this has come up before, that staffing, not only here, but in other programs, so anything to do with nursing, and in fact, healthcare in general, staffing is a problem. And so our ability to bring in and serve more people relates heavily to staff right now, and our inability to get and keep the kind of staff we need. So again, maybe looking at next year as the budget's being put together, if we don't anticipate that problem being totally fixed, but being in process of being corrected next year, you might want to take that into account as we lower our expectation. We can always serve more and have more revenue. That would be great. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kim, just involved, do you happen to know what recent ADC has been on mental health unit?
They're up to 6, I want to say right now. They have been up as high as 8. Some of that does have to do with the comfort of the locums coming in.
Sure.
Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, we'll fill in on inpatient, and then not really realizing, it's not just providing care for those patients in the unit. It's also going to court, doing the 30-day holds, the 90-day holds, and that adds a whole another level of complexity. So if you're not used to that as a provider, getting the documentation, it's usually an all-day thing that you're in court, also adds to that workload. So if they're not used to juggling that type of workload, it also stems the flow a little bit too. I will also say that the LPN students that we have, they'll be graduating, I believe in May. They're all doing really great. And part of that, having that program, as you know, Bartlett sponsored, I think 7 or 8 of those.
Yeah.
to go through the program. And part of that is to have them augment, and one of the places to augment would be on MHU. So we'd be able to augment the staff with LPNs that could help do medications, and then the higher level assessment would fall to the RN, freeing them up from doing the tasks that they can delegate to the LPN.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions with respect to this section, the financials? Okay, moving on then. So the next thing on our agenda is the JBJC update with Nate Runs. Nate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did briefly talk about this at the planning committee meeting as well. But we're still pursuing the purchase of the BBGH or Junibona joint property down the hill. The purchase agreement was proposed purchase agreement was transmitted to them in accordance with the board's direction and the assembly approval, actually at the end of September. We waited for a little bit to get some feedback from the principal down there, Dr. Bursell. We did get some feedback from him on that, where he would like to strike a section of the purchase agreement, one of the clauses from the purchase agreement. I've been advised through legal and others with the city to get CBG Lands and Resources to weigh in on that specific issue. I have yet to get that feedback. I was hopeful to get that from them today, but I don't have it. I don't think that this will be a major holdup by any means, but I do want to get CBJ Lands and Resources opinion on this before responding to Dr. Bursell and the ownership group down there. The good thing is we've already completed all of our appraisals and inspections for this purchase. And so unlike when Bartlett purchased the family practice facility, there will not be a prolonged back and forth on or needed to extend the period for closing. We know what we're getting into. We've agreed upon, for all intents and purposes, the value of that property. And once we can get the purchase agreement executed, I anticipate it will be a relatively straightforward process to closing, as little as 30 days. This is a tough time of year with businesses open and stuff like that, but it should be a relatively straightforward process once the purchase agreement is signed. Another thing that we've been advised to do in this particular case, because two properties down there, or two tenants down there are physician owned, is to establish new lease agreements with those tenants during the closing process and identify and agree upon fair market value lease rates as a part of the closing process. So we're working on that already. I don't anticipate there being any issues along those lines, having reviewed the appraisal again. And I've already talked with the ownership group down there about the ownership group for both of those tenants about that. And so as soon as I can get that answer from CBJ, go back to the ownership group and their attorney and say, here's why we can do that, or why don't we talk about this a little bit more and make sure that we're on the same page. I'm looking at probably about a month out from that until we can close.
Great, that's good.
I have a question
Yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
through the chair. Is there any benefit to closing before the end of the year versus it going over to next year?
Not to us. Could be
Okay.
for the sellers. We don't know what their tax situation is.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Nate?
Through the chair, on a related point, I do want to be able to demonstrate to the seller in this case that we are motivated and are taking our action towards getting this closed up.
Yeah, absolutely.
With what has happened and the environment around purchasing that type of property, I want to try to get this done as soon as I can. So.
Oh, Tom, through the chair. I guess you had the opportunity to just tell us very broadly what the issue was that's holding things up.
Sure.
You didn't take that opportunity, so I wonder if there's a reason.
Oh, no.
If you just broadly tell us what the issue.
Yeah, I believe it is a potentially misunderstanding of why the disclosure clause, which is a routine part of any type of property purchase, was included, or maybe some specifics about the language of the disclosure clause. They've asked us to strike it entirely. Anytime you purchase property, well, at least in the state of Alaska, the seller's going to be asked to disclose what they know about that property. Maybe it's, in this particular case, I think there could be some concern about the extent to which the current owners fully know everything about a couple of underground storage tanks that are on that property. I don't envision that's going to be an issue. And I do think that they would disclose what information they are aware of, but we're just kind of in this odd spot about disclosure.
If I could follow, because this relates to conflict of interest with me. Are you saying there might be some petroleum or some sort of?
No, this is only, the current owners are not there have been other owners of that property historically. The underground tanks were in place prior to this ownership group taking ownership. I believe they think that if there was an issue, such as what you had mentioned, and we identify that 2 years down the road, that if they didn't disclose that right now, we would, necessarily be able to go after them, legally.
But Nate, if I could, the question we're a little hung up as to do with what do you know versus
Exactly.
you need to find out stuff
Yes.
you don't know. That's where the hang up is.
Yes.
Then it's not any specific issue. It's just the legalese of the
Yes.
agreement itself.
And I want to come back to them with CBJ's position on this issue, just so there's a degree of comfort there. But that is my understanding of the concern, is we need them to tell us, what do you know? Not do you know everything that has ever happened here, but what do you know?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this update?
No, but I just would like to say for the
Yeah,
record
Brenda.
that I agree that we need to know more about that issue. If they hesitate at signing the disclosure statement or following through with that requirement, we need to know why. And I guess as part of that, I do have a question. So when that property was evaluated and an engineer looked at it and it was appraised and so forth, wouldn't an underground tank of any kind is always an alert?
Sure.
So, and it would seem like if there was some question about whether it had any petroleum in it, it very likely has leaked and it's got water with some residual petroleum in it under there. Ultimately, those things need to be filled with rocks and dirt. And you get a certificate saying you've decommissioned the tank. And it would seem like, well, I know it may be too late, but it's CBJ is comfortable with it, I guess.
I mean, there's been an engineering assessment on it. That was a part of the engineering assessment. I think that they have competent legal counsel, we all know, and we have competent legal counsel, and I'm sure we'll get there. I think it's just a matter of time. Right. Just leave it.
Mhm.
But I agree with you about the tank. I mean, that can be an issue and, Okay, moving on. The next is the ED expansion and the referral that we had from planning. And I want to see if Deb is on yet. Deb, are you there? Okay. Because since it's coming from planning, I just wanted to check in with her about it. But Nate, would you please just kind of bring us up to speed here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your packet, in the packet for today, there is an action cover memo from administration regarding this topic. I just wanted to bring that to your attention before I get started. This was also raised at the planning committee this month, but we are in the midst of the FY25 legislative capital priorities process for the city and borough of Juneau. I received an email about a month ago asking me to participate and weigh in on the FY25 legislative capital priorities process. And that information also at least came to Kenny eventually. It seemed like it would have come to the full board, but I don't have clarity on that point. Last year when Bartlett went through the legislative capital priority process, we missed the initial window to participate. And at some point later down the road, if you recall, we asked for $4 million worth of funding to support the Aurora Behavioral Health Center construction. And if you remember, the city agreed to that and then subsequently placed it on the priority list. It ended up as a lower priority. That's the process we're in again this year. I want to make sure that we take the time to participate in the window. And what we've discussed between myself and Deb, what was presented to the planning committee is rather than continuing to ask for $4 million in funding for a project that we've now completed. We know we've got the ED project, renovation project coming up. I've already submitted on the city's form a request and all of the required justification for consideration for $2 million in funding to support that project. The process appears to be that the board needs to specifically nominate that project for consideration as a part of the city's process. The reason I'm bringing it through this in this cycle is because I want to make sure that the board takes that opportunity, if it so chooses, to nominate that process through the city's process. I can't do it. When I tried to let the city know that we wanted it, they said, oh, well, that needs to come through your board. And I said, okay. But there's a little bit of background also in the action memo here. At the planning committee meeting, Max, you had asked if I could get any additional kind of hard, solid information on a cost estimate at this point. We've met internally, but I don't have updated information. We're still early enough on in the design process where I would say the most I feel comfortable with saying is I anticipate this project as it's conceived right now to be approximately a $10 million project for project cost. That includes the construction, the design components to this, and the FF&E. As of now, we have about $3.5 million set aside in Bartlett funds for this project. We also have the congressional directed spending request in for $4 million. And that leaves us with potentially a gap of approximately $2.5 million. This request is one component of additional funding sources we're looking at. We also, as of now, would plan on requesting $2 million from the Denali Commission in their next grant cycle next spring.
Before I ask for questions, just to clarify about my request, that we were all, I think we're all under the understanding that it has to go through this design process to get to a more complete set of documents before they can turn it over to an engineering estimator who will then do a more solid estimate. And then that time frame is spring. We're talking about May, June. So I think we all understand that we're dealing with some uncertainty at this point. So Shelley, do you have any questions for Nate?
No, I think we've discussed it. I was at the meeting, the planning meeting, so I feel comfortable.
Before we do a motion, anybody else on the board have any questions? We're talking about your thing here.
Max, I thought we were going to ask for $4 million. I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
And that's what I thought we talked about, Deb, isn't that correct?
Well, we talked about both.
Yeah. So
It came from planning, it's $2 million.
it's $2 million.
And the issue, the reason it switched from 4 to 2, I mean, we could have done 4. But if all of our ducks are in alignment with the possible alternate funding sources, Murkowski and the Denali Commission, as well as the bond, the electric bond issue, we would be able to fund it with that amount of money. What's not included in there is FF&E. And the estimate, my understanding was that was just under $2 million or right around $2 million for the full original build out. And the expectation was that it would undoubtedly be less than $2 million for the FF&E in this scope of work. So that's how we ended up at $2 million rather than $4 million.
There's a lot of uncertainty in this right now, Kenny, until we get better plans. I mean, it could be that we get blown out of the water on the money we've set aside and we'll have to deal with it. So I assume that on the CDS piece that if it had been in the stopgap funding the president signed yesterday, we would have heard about it. So it must not have been in there.
Through the chair, maybe not quite yet we would have heard about it, but I don't anticipate that it's been captured in the continuing resolution.
Brenda, oh, do you know?
No.
Brenda's got her contacts. So maybe Brenda knows.
I was speculating here if there's a problem with us asking for the city. If we asked for 4 million, we'd asked the last time. I mean, the fact that we would be asking for more than right now our projection says we would need if everything goes according to plan, makes me a little nervous because that's unlikely. And it's also unlikely we're going to get all of the funding we've requested from some of these sources. So I would think revisiting this, as it's discussed here, that if out of this committee, that if I'm not on finance, but if finance were to recommend to the board that we request for and go for that, if that came through before something else and we didn't need it all, obviously we have to return or not accept the full amount. When you sign off on the acceptance of an award, we can't be pilfering. And maybe one of the other sources, probably not the city, would allow us to use it for the FF&E if we got more than we'd anticipated. So I'd say if there's no harm done, let's ask for more and have a cushion.
I don't have any problem with that. If we're overfunded, we'd have to return it to someone.
Yeah, probably the last one that shows up with money.
Do we run the risk though of having our requests ranked lower if we are coming in for an amount higher than we really need?
That's what I'm not sure, unless our budget is, would there be something unacceptable with us including the cost of FF&E on there? Why not? That would expand the cost of the project, and it's a real cost we face, even if all of these sources would not be willing to fund that component.
I was just going to say, in any project like this, part of the project includes the FF&E. You're not going to be able to fit everything that's here now into the boxes. It's not going to you'll need the FF&E in any project that you put together. Particularly when you're applying for foundation or other grants, they expect that your budget includes that FF&E, and they'll want to know where you're going to get the funding for it.
Nate? You wanted to add?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
So I guess the question is, do we want to leave it at 2 or do we want to increase it to 4? It's very possible we're going to have to come back and ask for some more money at some point anyway on this. And it just seems to me that if we could ask, why not 6? It's just like, what, we don't really have, it's a little arbitrary, right? When we start adding zeros to this thing or multiples. And we've got a basis for the $2 million. We also have, this potential for the Denali Commission funding, which, potentially if we had that in the 2, based on the estimates, we kind of get there with the FF&E, right? So I don't know. We've got a recommendation for $2 million. I guess I recommend we stick with that.
Mr. Chair, so last year during the process too, we were so far behind the 8 ball, and we definitely were put on the list, but we didn't understand the process back then. We had kind of new leadership here, and I think that this time, not only are we gonna get on the list, but I think we're gonna get definitely a higher priority. Because last time we were like the bottom of the list, like 23 out of 23. So I'm hoping that this time we're gonna get to the top. I think we have someone that's gonna be in there champion for us too to help us. So if you guys are good with $2 million and really think we can get there, I think that that's probably a good number, and I think we're gonna have a really good shot at getting that.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel more comfortable going for a number that's realistic, and then if we have to come back for more later, we'll have a reason we had to do that, you know? Because we would have gotten Denali had it been further along. I mean, that was kind of our sense, is the only reason they told us no is that we just weren't just shovel ready yet, right? Which we will be on the next round, hopefully. So Shelley, do you want to make a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I move the Finance Committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital approve the recommendation to advance the ED expansion and renovation project funding request through the full Board of Directors at the CBJ Assembly as part of the FY25 legislative capital priorities process.
And I'll second.
Any discussion? Any opposed? Okay, we're done. And with that, we've concluded our, I believe that's the end of our agenda, isn't it? Yep, that's the end of our agenda. Are there any questions or comments from committee members or others at this point, though? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.
That was an efficient meeting. I'm glad I came in when I did.